welcome back to our studios here in Lahore. I'm Hamza Amjad. Now let's start with Afghanistan. 40 civilians have been killed in an attack by Afghan government forces in southern Helmand province. Government officials say a wedding party came under fire during an operation against a nearby bomb factory. Provincial Council member Abdul Majid Akhundzada said 13 others were wounded in the raid. Earlier today, the Taliban say they captured Jarwez district in central Maidan Wardak province after fighting with government forces. Spokesman Zabiullah Mujahid said 9 government troops were killed in the attack. He said Taliban fighters also destroyed 3 armoured personnel carriers. Meanwhile, the Taliban say US President Donald Trump will be responsible for any bloodshed in Afghanistan. Taliban spokesman Suhail Shaheen said a Taliban delegation visited Beijing to discuss peace talks with China's special representative for Afghanistan. Shaheen said the group had reached an agreement with the US to resolve the crisis in Afghanistan. Meanwhile, criticizing the upcoming election, Taliban called the process a game of elite politicians and a waste of money and time. The group's spokesperson said after spending millions last time, the public vote was rejected and Afghanistan's president was appointed by the US. They called on Afghanistan citizens, prominent figures and political campaigns to boycott the presidential polls. Now, for more on this, we are joined by Kabul-based political analyst, Mr. Intizar Khadim. Welcome to Indus News, Mr. Intizar, and thanks for your time. So as Afghanistan's general election is approaching, the situation appears to be getting worse day by day. Do you think the government can hold a peaceful ballot in this environment?
Well, thank you. I think you're right. We're just juggling ball at the same time. From one side, there is a hope for a peace deal that should have happened. From the second side, we're preparing for election. The big critique of the analysts and also the opposition from government and from opposition of election, that they said that holding election for the sake of election is not a solution for democracy in Afghanistan, because though we're a new democracy, started in 2001, but we're just getting worse day by day. The 2014 election, where John Kerry just carved up the power and put in the hand of Dr. Abdullah and Dr. Ghani, have not been a very good experience. Now, people are hesitant in Afghanistan to get out again and vote for someone where their rights will be disfranchised. We're happy as a nation to hold election, but we would like to make it fair, transparent, and accountable. And on the other side, there is a peace which is now moribund, which is now nascent. It was a bad call in a bad time from Donald Trump, where he just called off the peace talk. Now it's a slugfest between Taliban and the American and the Afghan government. Afghan government and the United States are trying to hit hard the Taliban to surrender, and Taliban are just revitalizing their commitment for a long-term fight. So it's an apocalypse. We're just living in an environment of hope and fear. I hope this holding election will be a new chapter of democracy, unless I think we can drench in another bloodshed in chaos.
Right, well, Mr. Intizar, let's talk about the peace talks now. Now, after 9 rounds of peace talks, Mr. Trump ended them quite abruptly. Now, but it does seem that both parties are eager to restart them. So what's the possibility of the rekindling of these talks, given what has happened?
Well, as Donald Trump said, it did. I think it's not dead. You cannot kill a process which will be taking new life every single day. Peace is now the demand of the Afghan public. The 2 sides or 3 sides who are involved in war, they cannot fight for 100 years. That the countries in the region, including China and Russia, are more eager to be involved in peace process, because a drenching, a deepening grim in insecurity in Afghanistan can harm their stability as well. China invested $42 billion in Gwadar in Pakistan, and they already prepared to spend $100 billion of other dollars on One Belt and One Road project. The recent trip of Taliban leadership is a clear signal from the Chinese government, who are trying to graft the broken parts of the peace deal. So the next phases, which I can predict, is the resumption of peace talk. No matter if Donald Trump is called did or didn't program or whatever, but I'm thinking that there is no B option table. The only thing each person can take it from the table is the resumption of talking, and I'm hoping it will start, but it could be costly. More people will die every day, but ultimately there will be a peace deal between our sides.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Intizar Khadim. According to him, peace is now the demand of the Afghan public. We will be keeping an eye on that, but for now, let's move on to the next story. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan is set to meet US President Donald Trump today in New York City. PM Khan will brief Trump on the worsening situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir after its illegal annexation by New Delhi. The two leaders are also expected to discuss the Afghan peace process and bilateral relations. The meeting comes ahead of the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Khan has vowed to highlight violations of international law under the imposition of the curfew and communications blackouts in the occupied valley. Prime Minister Khan is also scheduled to meet Britain Prime Minister Boris Johnson and China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi today. And now Prime Minister Imran Khan, in a meeting in New York, has called on Amnesty International Secretary General Kumi Naidu. PM Khan informed Naidu about the humanitarian crisis in occupied Kashmir after India stripped the region of its autonomy on the 5th of August.
At a meeting in New York, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has informed Amnesty International's Secretary General Kumi Naidu about the humanitarian crisis in occupied Kashmir after India stripped the region of its autonomy on the 5th of August. The Prime Minister said India is not allowing human rights organizations to visit the valley, which has been under a curfew for over a month. Khan lauded the role of Amnesty International for highlighting the plight of Kashmiris. Naidu briefed the Prime Minister on Amnesty's advocacy work on Kashmir, including the hashtag Let Kashmir Speak campaign. In a separate meeting with Senator Lindsey Graham, Khan discussed the deteriorating situation in occupied Kashmir. He urged Graham to continue highlighting the Kashmir issue on all forums.
In the United States, U.S. presidential hopeful Bernie Sanders has criticized President Donald Trump for attending Indian Prime Minister's Howdy Modi event. Calling Narendra Modi's government an authoritarian regime, Sanders slammed Trump's silence over the crushing lockdown of Indian-occupied Kashmir. Sanders said Modi unilaterally revoked Kashmir's UN-recognized autonomy, cracked down on dissent, and jailed all political leaders. In his article in the Houston Chronicle, Bernie wrote Kashmiris are struggling to access life-saving medicines due to New Delhi's lockdown. Former Chief Minister of occupied Kashmir, Mehbooba Mufti, also slammed Modi's rally and his comments on Article 370. In a tweet, Mufti said this is a mass hysteria orchestrated across the world to justify the move, while the valley is completely gagged. Earlier, hundreds of people have taken to the streets in Houston to protest India's human rights violations in occupied Kashmir. Demonstrators from the Pakistani, Kashmiri and Sikh communities demanded that India lift the curfew in the valley. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressed a public meeting in Houston. Protesters say that under Modi's Hindu nationalist government, human rights, including religious freedom, are endangered. They also highlighted India's crackdown on Kashmiris in the occupied valley. The protesters also demanded an end to the communications blackout in Indian-occupied Kashmir. New Delhi's lockdown in occupied Kashmir has now entered its 50th day. France says its main priority at the UN General Assembly is to de-escalate tensions between the US and Iran. But Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian says it is not aiming to organize a meeting between the US and Iranian presidents. France has been leading European efforts to defuse Gulf tensions and to salvage the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran. This appears to have stalled, with Tehran reducing its commitments to the nuclear accord. The recent airstrikes on Saudi oil facilities, which the US blames on Iran, have only added to these tensions. French Foreign Minister Le Drian says it is imperative to get to the bottom of the attacks to give a firm political response. French President Emmanuel Macron will meet Iranian President Hassan Rouhani on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. Britain has also blamed Iran for attacks on the Saudi oil facilities. Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the UK will work with the US and European allies on a joint response. Speaking to reporters en route New York, Johnson claimed Tehran is responsible. He said the UK will closely watch a proposal by the United States to do more to help defend Saudi Arabia. Johnson said he will discuss Iran's actions in the region with President Hassan Rouhani at the meeting. He will also push for the release of several dual-national Iranians being held by Tehran. Earlier, Foreign Minister Dominic Raab said there is not yet enough evidence to fix responsibility for the attacks. Now, Iran has said British-flagged oil tanker is free to leave. Tehran's Revolutionary Guard seized the vessel more than 2 months from in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's government spokesman Ali Rabi said legal process has finished and the oil tanker can leave as and when it pleases. Talking to the media earlier, the Swedish owner of the oil tanker said Iran may release the seized vessel in hours. The chief executive of Stena Bulk, Eric Hanel, says he has received information suggesting the ship will be released soon. Hanel says the political decision has been taken to release the vessel. Now, in Egypt, over 350 people have been arrested across the country in the latest wave of protests against President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Thousands of demonstrators came out in defiance of a government ban to demand al-Sisi's resignation. A huge crowd joined the demonstrations around Tahrir Square in Cairo. The demonstrations come after self-exiled Egyptian businessman Muhammad Ali accused the president of corruption and demanded his removal. Al-Sisi has dismissed the allegations, calling them lies. Such demonstrations are very rare in Egypt, where unauthorized protests were effectively banned in 2013. With that, we're going to take a short break, but don't go anywhere. More stories to follow. Welcome back. Now, in Yemen, 5 members of a family have been killed in government coalition airstrikes in Omran province. The Houthi-run Al Masirah TV reported the aircraft hit a mosque and adjoining house. The rebels say 2 of the family's children died in the attack. Yemen's military coalition has not yet confirmed the raid, although last week rebels announced a halt to attacks on Saudi Arabia, saying the gesture is meant to start peace talks with the kingdom. The United Nations envoy for Syria says progress has been made on forming a Syrian constitutional committee. Geir Pedersen says the committee will be rewriting the war-torn country's constitution. Pedersen was speaking on his arrival in Damascus. The envoy is set to commence a new round of talks with Syria's Foreign Minister Walid al-Muallim. He was confident his latest visit would be successful. In Israel, Arab lawmakers have backed Blue and White Party leader Benny Gantz to be the next prime minister. The joint list, a bloc of Arab parties that came in third, says it wants to force Benjamin Netanyahu from power. President Reuven Rivlin held consultations with party leaders to nominate a prime minister after no clear victor emerged from last week's elections. Benjamin Netanyahu's right-wing Likud failed for the second time to secure a clear election victory. Rivlin suggested both Netanyahu's Likud and the Blue and White Party form a unity government. Benny Gantz has already rebuffed calls to join a coalition. This is the first time since 1992 that the majority Arab parties have endorsed a candidate for prime minister.
Netanyahu leaving the power is the most important historical thing in the last decade. Our recommendation is historical, and the results are so important, not for Arabs only, but for Jews and Arabs and for the whole area. It is also a slap on the face, not only of Benjamin Netanyahu, but President Trump, who supported Benjamin Netanyahu.
7 students have been killed and 64 others wounded after a classroom roof collapsed at a school in the Kenyan capital of Nairobi. Officials say the first floor caved in, trapping children below. The accident occurred shortly after 7 a.m. as pupils entered the classroom. Emergency services say a rescue operation is underway to pull trapped students from out of the rubble. Authorities had previously warned nearly 40,000 unapproved buildings are at risk of collapse. Spanish police have arrested 9 activists linked to Catalonia's pro-independence movement. The activists were accused of planning violence in the region. During the raids in various towns of Catalonia, police seized materials used in explosives, computer hardware and documentation. The movement calling for Catalonia's separation from Spain has been a major challenge for the country for years, but the association has been a peaceful movement characterized by non-violent mass protests. Protesters in Indonesia's Papua province have set fire to homes and government buildings during a rally. The unrest was allegedly triggered by racist slurs directed at students by a teacher in Wamena. Indonesian security forces say they are fighting to restore order in the easternmost province. The statement follows reports of gunfire and arson during fresh demonstrations. Protests also hit the Javanese city of Surabaya for 2 weeks in August. Since the start of the unrest, Indonesia has sent nearly 6,000 military and police personnel to the region. President Donald Trump says he did not say anything wrong during a telephone call with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. According to reports, Trump pressed the Ukrainian president to investigate former Vice President Joe Biden and his son. President Trump says he had a great conversation with President Zelensky on the 25th of July. Trump added he would have no problem with his personal lawyer, Rudolph Giuliani, testifying before Congress. The president said he is not looking to hurt Biden, but he did a very dishonest thing. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has accused Joe Biden of improperly intervening to protect his son from an investigation in Ukraine. Earlier, Biden called for a probe into Trump's conversations with the Ukrainian president. A damning new UN report warns that the world is falling badly behind in the race to avoid a climate disaster. This is the result of increased warming, with the last 5 years set to be the hottest ever. More in this report.
The signs and the impact of global heating are speeding up, says the latest Science on Climate Change, published ahead of the key UN talks in New York. The data compiled by the World Meteorological Organization says 5-year period from 2014 to 2019 is the warmest on record.
We have been breaking records in temperatures. Last July was the warmest single month since 1850, and last June was the warmest June that we have observed since 1850 again, and so far we have seen 1.1 degree warming.
The report spells out the extent to which the gap between what is required and what is happening is widening. And still, there is no sign that we have reached peak emissions, the point at which levels will start to fall. Rather than dropping, carbon dioxide levels grew 2% in 2018, reaching a record high of 37 billion tons.
One take-home message is that the global emissions of carbon dioxide for 2018 appear to have gone up about 2.1%. So it's the largest increase we've seen in more than 5 years. And 2019 is on track to rise further as the global economy.
Researchers warn if greenhouse gas emissions don't start falling soon, there will be hell to pay. Perhaps most worrying of all is the data on sea level rise. In the meantime, hundreds of climate activists in Switzerland have been paying their respects to a glacier that is expected to disappear over the next 10 years. The Pizol Glacier in the Glarus Alps has been retreating as temperatures climb.
We can basically not save this glacier. This glacier is a symbol that glaciers are disappearing, that the ice is melting in the Alps. We cannot save this glacier, but there are many other glaciers that we can potentially save by protecting the climate. The bigger glaciers, they can still be saved, but also in a smaller size.
The gathering in Switzerland mirrors an event in August when activists in Iceland marked the vanishing of one of that island's glaciers.
First up in business, Thomas Cook, the world's oldest travel firm, has collapsed with over $2 billion of debt. The bankruptcy has triggered the biggest ever peacetime repatriation effort in British history as operations have been seized. Spain's airport operator ANA has announced that 46 flights operated by the collapsed British travel group have been cancelled. The 178-year-old firm went down after failing to secure additional funding. The Civil Aviation Authority Director Tim Johnson has promised a coordinated effort to bring British holidaymakers home.
This is a huge operation, 150,000 people currently abroad. We've chartered over 40 aircraft, and those aircraft are already in position. And then in the next few hours, we'll start bringing passengers home.
Well, it's 34 degrees Celsius here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. And that was all I have from the News Bulletin at the moment, but do stay tuned to Indus News for further updates. And as always, thanks for watching.